So, Stefaan, very nice to see you again. Can you tell us more about who you are and what gets you excited these days?
I'm Stefaan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of the GovLab, based in New York, and also of the Data Tank, based here in Brussels. And so what gets me excited is really focusing on how do we change the way we make decisions, making them more effective and more legitimate, leveraging new tools, new assets, and also new methods. And so within that context, I've really tried to focus on the one hand, how do we leverage and engage with people and their expertise in new ways, which we quite often may call collective intelligence in one way or another. But also the other asset that we focused on is, of course, data. And how can you start leveraging data in ways that generates insights that decision makers can use. And what really gets me excited is then where those two meet. So where the collective intelligence and data intelligence, sometimes artificial intelligence also might intersect.
How do we come up with better questions?
As a society, we are obsessed with answers. We're obsessed with solutions, or if we move into the data space, we are obsessed with data and the fact that either we need data or we need to collect more data. Unfortunately, that doesn't generate value, and quite often, it doesn't give us the answers that are needed in society because we don't focus on the questions that matter, and we have no vehicles that identify what are the questions that matter and how do we formulate them in a way that they become inspirational but also seek to inform the decisions that matter as such. I've tried to develop what we may call a new science of questions, in order to complement data science, in order to complement the way we go about identifying answers and solutions. And it's a participatory initiative where we try to tap into the collective intelligence of society, of particular kind of communities, of particular kind of domain experts, in order to really source the questions and then subsequently prioritize them in a way that then can be used. Because we are trying to be participatory, it tries to also provide for more question equity. Because too often, what we see is that those questions are formulated by a small group of actors in society, whether it's the media, or whether it's politicians, or whether it's even researchers themselves that decide that these are the priority questions. And unfortunately, society and communities are often never part of that agenda setting. And as a result, we have a power asymmetry because what the answers are, what we pay attention to, how we frame the problem is all based upon the question we seek to answer and the question we formulate.
So what does that participatory process look like to correct this asymmetry, and can you give us an example of how you've done it concretely?
One of the initiatives I created a few years ago is called the 100 Questions Initiative, where I came kind of frustrated that everyone was focusing on data, and subsequently I went public and said instead of 100 data sets, which are still important, we should really focus on the 100 questions that matter. And so the 100 Questions is a multi-step participatory process, tapping into the collective intelligence of what we call bilinguals, which are people that have a particular kind of domain or lived experience combined with data or decision experience as well. And we believe that those kind of bilinguals might be ideally positioned to really, in the first phase, try to identify the questions that matter given a particular kind of domain or given a particular kind of geographical focus, for instance, communities or cities or even countries for that matter. So what we do is, we curate those bilinguals, we then source the questions, we subsequently cluster them according to similarities, prioritize them according to a set of criteria used by the bilinguals, such as potential impact if answered, or level of novelty, or to what extent they provide a unique perspective on the problem that would benefit more people than otherwise would be the case. And once we have that kind of first batch of priority question, we then subsequently make it public and have a public engagement, including a voting strategy, to then rank the questions with public input, so that subsequently we have both a smaller group but also the public at large that has been part of the process.
What has struck you as being different in the 100 questions that citizens come up with?
What is interesting is that quite often before we start, we also do a collective topic mapping. Meaning, what are all the topics or all the aspects that are associated with a particular kind of problem? Call it migration or an opportunity, gender, call it disinformation, meaning any kind of domain where you may want to source a set of questions that are needed to be answered in order to make progress there. And what is interesting is that by doing this topic mapping, we then quite often then compare it with what is the current level of attention vis-a-vis some of those topics. And what we see typically emerge are what we call orphan topics, which are topics that people care about but are not addressed in society, in the media, or are not on the horizon of policymakers. And so leveraging collective intelligence, you can actually identify orphan issues that matter to them but are not yet addressed. And so that's one way to rectify the area of agenda setting.
Wonderful. Do you have any governments or any public authorities showing interest in that approach?
Yeah, we have multiple, because one of the criteria for us to do a 100 Questions initiative is that we need to have a partner that is willing to subsequently act upon the questions identified. And so we've worked over the years with multiple international and national organizations, ranging from, for instance, the European Commission and the Joint Research Centers, to the UN Foundation, to, for instance, Data2X, which is focused on gender equality. But also at the national level, we've seen that some governments have expressed an interest. For instance, there is an interest in I'm not going to name names here, but national governments to develop 100 questions for their country. But also at the city level, for instance, New York City has also tried to identify their 100 questions. Boston, for instance, has developed also a research agenda for Boston and so on. So yeah, so I think there is an interest, because it turns out 4 million questions is hard, and it's also hard for politicians.